Tonight, when you get a few hours of free time, your brain will probably default to a digital screen. You might stream a show, scroll through a social feed, or boot up a video game. It feels like a basic human necessity to escape reality for a little while after a long day of work. But take a second to strip all of that away. Get rid of the internet, the television, electricity, books, and even written language. Roll the clock back 30,000 years into the depths of the Paleolithic era. The sun has just gone down, the tribe has finished eating, the fire is burning steady, and the camp is secure for the night. What do you actually do for fun? For a long time, the standard view of our ancient ancestors was that their lives were a brutal, non-stop struggle for survival. The popular assumption was that if you weren't actively hunting, gathering, or running from an apex predator, you were sleeping to conserve your precious calories. But modern anthropology turned that bleak idea completely on its head. When researchers began studying the few remaining hunter-gatherer societies left on Earth, they discovered something shocking. These groups often only spend about 3 to 5 hours a day securing food, water, and shelter. The rest of their time is completely free, and there's no reason to think our Ice Age ancestors were any different. In fact, ancient humans had an abundance of leisure time. They just didn't have a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry to fill it for them. They had to invent the concept of fun entirely from scratch. The most universal way they did this was through something deeply embedded in the mammalian brain, the instinct to play. But while animals play primarily to practice basic survival skills like pouncing or running, humans did something entirely unique. We invented games with completely arbitrary rules. The earliest physical evidence we have of this comes in the form of tiny, polished objects found in the dirt. If you dig through archaeological sites across Europe, Asia, and Africa, you will frequently find the ankle bones of hooved animals like sheep, deer, or goats. These are called astragali, or knuckle bones. Long before anyone invented plastic, cardboard, or playing cards, these small bones were the world's very first dice. Each bone naturally had 4 distinct sides, and depending on how it landed when thrown onto a flat surface, it yielded a different value or meaning. Originally, humans likely used them for divination, trying to predict the weather, the success of tomorrow's hunt, or the will of the spirits. But at some point, someone realized that waiting for the future was boring, but competing against your friends to see who could get the highest score was incredibly engaging. Knuckle bones became a global obsession that lasted for millennia. They have been found in prehistoric caves, Egyptian tombs, and Roman military camps. Imagine a group of hunters sitting in a circle, shouting, laughing, and wagering beautiful shells or rare stones on the flip of a goat's ankle. For tens of thousands of years, the sound of small bones rattling on a flat rock was the universal soundtrack to a game night. But human play wasn't just restricted to tabletop games. We also wanted to move, to compete, and to test our bodies without the high stakes of actual life-or-death combat. One of the oldest sports in human history is wrestling. We know this because ancient people left us unmistakable visual evidence of their athletic pastimes. In rock shelters across southern Europe and North Africa, there are paintings thousands of years old showing human figures locked in specific grappling stances. These are not depictions of warfare. There are no weapons, no blood, and the postures are highly stylized, showing specific holds and throws. Wrestling allowed young humans to burn off nervous energy, establish social hierarchies, and show off their physical prowess without anyone getting seriously hurt. It was the ultimate low-cost, high-reward entertainment. Then there is the world of music. For a long time, historians assumed music was a relatively late development in human culture, something that came along with agriculture and the rise of large civilizations. Then, archaeologists excavating a cave in southwestern Germany found something that redefined our understanding of ancient creativity. Buried deep in the sediment was a small hollowed-out radius bone from a griffin vulture. It had 5 precisely drilled holes and a carefully notched end for a mouthpiece. It was a flute. When scientists tested the age of the layer it was found in, the result came back at roughly 40,000 years old. This wasn't a crude noisemaker. The holes were spaced with mathematical precision, tuned to produce a specific, recognizable musical scale that sounds remarkably close to modern Western music. A few years later, in the same region, they found flutes carved from solid mammoth ivory. Think about the sheer amount of effort required to split a piece of dense mammoth tusk, hollow out the center perfectly, and seal it back together with an airtight natural adhesive, just to make an instrument. You don't put that much labor into a tool unless it matters deeply to your quality of life. Music in the ancient world wasn't a passive experience where an audience sat silently in rows while a performer played. It was fully participatory, tied to rhythm, dancing, and the physical spaces humans inhabited. In fact, acoustic archaeologists have discovered a fascinating secret about Paleolithic cave art. When they map out the deepest chambers of famous caves in France and Spain, they find that the highest concentration of paintings almost always correlates with the areas of the cave that have the best resonance and echo. If you walk into a deep cavern and sing, clap, or beat a drum, the sound bounces off the stone walls in a way that feels larger than life. The ancient people noticed this. They specifically picked the places with the best acoustics to paint their masterpieces. Imagine standing in pitch darkness, miles underground, illuminated only by a flickering torch. Someone begins to beat a frame drum, another person plays a bone flute, and the sound vibrates so violently through the stone walls that you can feel it in your chest. The painted mammoths and bison on the walls would appear to move and leap in the shifting firelight. This wasn't just fun, it was an immersive, multi-sensory spectacle designed to entertain, awe, and connect the community. But entertainment wasn't just for the adults. In the harsh environment of the Ice Age, did children get to experience a normal childhood? The archaeological record answers with a resounding yes. For a long time, small, crudely carved stone and clay objects found at ancient sites were routinely labeled by archaeologists as ritual items, fertility charms, or religious figurines. But a closer look revealed a much more heartwarming story. Researchers studying a 14,000-year-old site looked closely at a collection of small ceramic animals, tiny mammoths, bears, and horses. They noticed that many of them bore the distinct small fingerprints of children pressed into the clay before it was baked. They also noticed that the figures showed heavy wear, as if they had been dragged through the dirt, dropped, and clutched tightly in small hands. Ancient parents spent their quiet hours carving miniature weapons, tiny stone dolls, and little wooden animals for their children to play with. In various European sites, archaeologists have found miniature clay pots that are completely non-functional for cooking, but perfectly sized for a toddler's hands to play house. Children have always been children, and ancient adults made sure their kids had the toys necessary to explore their imaginations. There was also a lighter, more mischievous side to ancient fun that we often overlook: humor, performance, and storytelling. We tend to view prehistoric people as stoic, serious survivalists who only thought about the next meal. But their art suggests they loved a good laugh. In various rock art sites around the world, you can find unmistakable caricatures, figures with exaggeratedly large features, funny postures, or comical depictions of people falling over or making mistakes. They were the prehistoric equivalent of a visual meme. Furthermore, around the evening fire, storytelling wasn't just about reciting dry histories, it was performance art. Hunters would mime the events of the day, mimicking the sounds of animals, the rustle of the brush, and the panic of the chase. They would use the shadows cast by the fire against the cave walls to create elaborate shadow puppets, turning a simple rock face into a moving storybook. Humans have always looked for ways to make each other laugh. And when you were trapped in a shelter during a long, brutal winter, a sharp sense of humor and a knack for performance were probably the most valuable traits you could possess to keep group morale alive. Even the act of creating the famous hand stencils found in caves across the globe likely had a major element of leisure and socialization to it. To make a hand stencil, an ancient human would place their hand flat against the rock wall, mix pigment like red ochre or charcoal with water in their mouth, and blow it through a hollow reed like a primitive spray gun. Recent analysis of the size and proportions of these handprints has revealed something beautiful. A huge percentage of them do not belong to adult male hunters, but rather to women, teenagers, and young children. It was a family affair. It was groups of friends hanging out in the dry safety of the cave, leaving their marks on the wall, experimenting with colors and turning a blank stone face into a collaborative art project just to pass the time. When you look at all of these pieces together, a completely different picture of our ancient ancestors emerges. They weren't miserable, primitive brutes living on the razor's edge of existential dread. They were deeply creative people who understood the absolute value of downtime. They spent their afternoons and evenings telling jokes around the hearth, rolling bones to test their luck, wrestling on the grass, making toys for their toddlers, and filling the dark caverns of the earth with the haunting, beautiful sounds of flutes and shared songs. They didn't have an endless stream of digital content to consume, but in a way, that absence made their entertainment much more powerful than ours. Every game they played, every song they sang, and every story they performed required another human being to be fully present in the room. Their fun didn't isolate them behind a screen, it bound them together. It turned a loose group of biological primates into a rich, cohesive human culture. We might have drastically changed the technology we use to pass the hours, but the underlying urge remains exactly the same. We are still just trying to find a way to laugh, to play, to connect, and to feel alive after the work of the day is done.